Welcome to the latest episode of the Low Production High Value Show, a show for and about entrepreneurs.
Here we go. We're going to jump right in. First of all, thanks for being with me, Alex. I've been looking forward to this.
Thanks for inviting me.
So we're going to jump into the deep end. You've said the future is not something we predict, but something we design. How does AI expand our ability to design futures rather than just react to disruption?
Wow, this was really jumping in from the beginning. So let's do a stepping back for 1 second.
Sure.
So because there are two elements here which are not necessarily connected in the first take, but we are connecting them. So the first element is the idea of the future, and the second element is artificial intelligence. So I'm assuming that you mean artificial intelligence also generative, and not just the day-to-day artificial intelligence which we used for 50 years, like in filtering junk mail, for example.
Right.
So it's like the stealth artificial intelligence. So I think you are referring to what is now visible, because now this is what we witnessed in the last 5 years or 4 years.
So to your point, there's been a lot of AI in a lot of what we do, or a lot of what we experience and come in contact with historically.
Right.
In some ways unbeknownst to us. But now...
And now it's visible. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's out of stealth. So now let's go to first of all, the idea of the notion of the future. The future is an idea. So the future is a concept. And just like the past is a concept, the only thing that is not a concept is the present. And the present, like Alan Watts used to do this very interesting trick, which I have here on my desk because I do it as well. This is the only manifestation of the present. That sound is now in the past. We don't know if it's going to be in the future, but that sound had one single moment of being in the present, and that sound was.
Can I just sort of interject on that? When you have, so if I'm watching you and I see you lift the baton,
as that happens, becomes the past.
Oh, but what I'm saying is, as I'm anticipating that you're going to hit.
That doesn't become a future because I could stop.
Okay.
So my intent doesn't mean that I will hit it. Like the visible manifest action of me lifting something doesn't mean I'm going to drop it. So that's another thing that you cannot anticipate, especially when it belongs to other people's will. In other words, you cannot anticipate what I will do. I can not anticipate what you will do.
Right.
You can definitely anticipate, and this is the point I'm trying to make, what you do yourself. Are you constructing this future in which you are going to hit the wooden fish? And in that moment, you make that sound, which is the present. From that moment, so we are the only ones, the only animal, I will say, that has a conscious understanding that we continually live in our own present. And we continually become our own past. So now that's an interesting thing. I know you may think this is too deep for the deep end you proposed.
No.
But
it's all good, because I knew we would end up.
No, but it's just the first 5 minutes, so we have to go someplace. So we can only resurface now. So now the thing is, since we know that we construct this act with volition, we can hit the thing. We realize that the future is a concept. And the future is a concept that we give life to, which means we can design it. So the future, in my definition, is the behavior that we undertake, or the modification of behavior, with our own will to make it happen. It's not an abstract thing. It's a thing that we can engage in building. We can, like, from the moment I pick this up and I'm intending to do something, so I have an intent, I have an articulation of this intent, which is muscle memory, and I have a manifestation of the intent, which is hitting the thing. That is the future constructed by me, and in that moment becomes the past. You know what's interesting about the whole thing? It becomes both present and past at the exact same moment. So, and that's a very interesting concept that you need to understand in the context of business. The future, present, and past are the same in 1 second.
Always.
Exactly. This is the interesting part. The future, meaning the actuation of the future, becomes past and present at the same time.
Well,
But the future as an abstract idea is here all the time. We can build it. I can make other sounds.
Right.
So this is why we like music, because and dancing, because it's happening always in the present past. In other words, it's always being, and a musician knows what the future is as well. That's because they know the music they are going to play, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now imagine that in the context of business.
But before we touch on business,
but no, let me connect it with AI, because that's the important part. Okay.
Yep.
So the difference between us and AI, when it comes to activating the future that we are intending, is best demonstrated when you draw. So when you draw something or you paint, you have a couple of limitations and a couple of affordances. So if you have talent and you can see things on paper before you draw them, then you follow the shape you see, right? People that can draw hands or draw horses don't invent them. They see them on the paper. So they see them first in their imagination, in the place in the brain where we have a mental faculty that allows us to see these things, and then they transfer what they see here on paper. If they don't see it here, they don't transfer it on paper. People that don't see it here construct it. So they have construction lines. You have corners that cross. So if we see a drawing in which the corners are crossed, somebody constructed this shape. So now let's go back to the idea of future, past, and so on. I'm drawing, so I'm limited by my bias. How well can I draw? When I draw, if I don't see it, I'm discovering what I'm drawing all the time. And the discoveries I'm making with the line, the flow of that drawing is a measure of what I know how to draw. It's not a measure of what's possible to draw. It's not a measure of what I would like to draw. It's a measure only of what I can draw. So I'm completely limited by my understanding, my talent, my skill, my color palette, my so on and so forth. And I do not know what I will end up with eventually. And sometimes it's said that in art, the talent of the artist is to know where to draw the line. And knowing where to draw the line means when to stop. Now, I have the intent to draw something. I have the articulation, which is I know how to explain. And then I have the manifestation, which is my physical skill of drawing. Generative AI doesn't have any bias in terms of what it can do. In generative AI, I have the intent, I articulate through a prompt, and the generative network knows from the beginning what the outcome will be. So while it's rendering, it knows exactly how the thing looks at the end. In other words, it knows the future.
But even though we may not know what that end output will be, it does.
The generative neural network knows because it knows what elements it's used in its definition of what the object will be. The network, the discriminator, what the discriminator of the system allows it as a form to be manifest. So it knows exactly what it will be. It knows the resolution, it knows the aspect ratio, it knows everything. And that is a very different understanding of how I can plan the future now with AI, because I can get an image of the future very, very quickly and start making choices. So I can get options of the future I couldn't get before. Like in the past, in Foresight, for example, we spent months and months and months writing scenarios. And the scenarios were describing object, place, people, circumstance, and you define how they interact and so on. And then you tell the story. Eventually, you show some photographs and we make some prototypes with how this thing will be interacted with. Right now, if I want to convince a client that the future of this, let's call it police force or whatever, what have you, is this one, all I have to do is illustrate it. Like I'm giving them a destination immediately. I want to say urban architecture for mitigation, boom, it looks like this. And immediately I don't have to write a scenario because it's a physical entity that I'm looking at. And don't forget the difference, what they're looking at. They're looking at an image, and the brain sees that image in the exact same place where it sees every other image. For the brain, there is no physical reality as opposed to virtual reality. The brain doesn't distinguish that. The brain sees everything in the visual cortex. That's the reality. It happens to be on the screen. Like right now, my brain doesn't know you are not in the room. And it not only doesn't know, but it doesn't care.
But where does our ability to distinguish between, or now maybe it's only a degree of skepticism about when we look at an image or a video and say, oh, that was created with AI versus...
What difference does it make? I mean, you know where it comes? It comes from the misunderstanding of language.
Okay.
And people, for example, use the word artificial intelligence. Do you think anybody knows what the word artificial means? You'll be shocked. But people don't know.
We've collectively agreed to mean that there's an element of not real.
Absolutely not. That's not what it means.
No, I'm not saying I'm not saying necessarily that it's...
No, but you know what's funny about language? Actually, it means something.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I'm suggesting is that, right or wrong, we have collectively agreed, or there's a consensus around what...
No.
Okay.
It's pure it's pure ignorance. It's not a consensus.
Okay.
It's ignorance. Artificial means artificialis, on and or for art. It's made for art. That's what it means.
Okay.
It means made for art. It's made to be artificial. It's made by humans. It's made by people to distinguish it from made by nature or natural. Because those are the dichotomies. Natural versus artificial. Here's the big surprise. There is no natural art. All art is artificial. Every single building around you is artificial. Every single thing in your room right now is artificial. And you think is real. This is amazing, right? You think it's real. So, and we would have never had this conversation 20 years ago because the word artificial was not important. But now the word artificial is important. People talk about it without knowing what it means. And that is frustrating as an educator, right? As an educator, it's frustrating because then you realize all art is artificial, and that's not a false statement. That's absolutely true. And because it's artificial, it has human intent. And because that human intent is natural. Because you are nature, right? I hope you still think you are an animal, and and you are nature, and that's the nature of nature. Nature creates. Nature has a beaver, and the beaver makes a beaver dam, and the beaver dam is not part of nature. Of course it is. Is it built by nature? Yes, it is. Who's the nature? Beaver. Or a bird. The bird builds a nest. You build a Taj Mahal. There's no difference. Oh, if you think there's a difference, we have a major problem.
Well, I want to jump back to you were talking about the striking of the baton against the other
wooden fish. The wooden fish.
A wooden fish.
The call to prayer for the Buddhists.
Oh, okay. For those listening, hitting essentially a drumstick against a wooden fish.
This is the wooden fish.
Okay. And
that's the call.
Okay. Well, so...
Hope I didn't destroy your speakers.
No. It's all good. But so you talked about the striking of the fish as being both present and past simultaneously.
And future.
Right. So taking that line of thinking, and we look at a musical recording. But the artist has captured that musical recording. But if I'm hearing a song for the first time, and I cannot anticipate what note comes next, whether chorus or bridge or whatever, that's the
future unraveling before your ears.
Right. So, but is the past, present, future only applicable to the artist who recorded it versus me, the listener?
Both. No, to the way you experience life. You experience it in the course of time.
Right.
And in the course of time, there are moments which become what we call abstractly the past, which is an absurdity because it doesn't exist. Things which don't exist just don't exist. And then another one which you abstractly call the future, because it doesn't yet manifest itself. And then the thing manifests itself, and it's this moment, and it's just a fraction of a second. And then we were so happy, like, wow, it happened.
Well, so do you then define the future as a series of yet to be experienced moments?
Exactly. Yet to be experienced moments which we intend to create. And that's where we come to business and understanding that we are empowered right now to create that future. We were empowered before as well, but now more of us are empowered to illustrate what that future might be and to engage in constructing one or the other.
Okay, so to build on that, when you talk about like in a business context, the future is a series of moments yet to be experienced. And as you said, we're designing our future. Yeah. But we're designing our future in the context of potentially being impacted by market forces.
Sure. Yeah, in a way, yeah. Like to go back for 1 second to the idea, what we are doing right now, it's a manifestation of a future we both planned 2 weeks ago.
Right.
Right. So we planned. So our intent and manifestation. Our intent.
I've never thought about my calendar so abstractly.
Right. No. But that's what it is. Your calendar is a window into that future, right? And you send people your calendar. Essentially, you are inviting them to make a choice about how the future shapes. Right.
Join my future.
You give it to make it together. You give it a time and a date.
Right.
Very rigorously so, right? So now market forces, we planned it through our intent. We articulated the day and the time. We sent us emails back and forth. And then there is a market force, which is an earthquake or COVID or a disruptor of technical nature, technological nature, behavioral nature, some force. Essentially, we are discussing about a force, right? An outside force or an inside out. So inside out, you are sick or you have to go someplace, or an outside force, something happens to you or to us. So the question is, how do we react? How can we prevent it? So we face all the time this preemptive mentality, like, can I preempt this? And can I prepare myself to mitigate things I don't know might come? What is the worst possible scenario? And in my experience, I've never seen society be able to really preempt anything.
Right. But we buy insurance just in case.
We buy insurance, which is a blanket, sure. Like it's a very big thing. Humans are traditionally really, really bad at preventing things. Because, can we prevent COVID? Can we prevent? No, we can prevent maybe a nuclear war, but I don't know. Can we prevent a nuclear war when we get to that stage? So the question is, by the time you get to a stage in which that might happen, the tensions in the world are so incredibly, unmutable that that is the only valve. It might be the only valve. I'm not advocating for war. I'm saying that this is how we get to wars. It's essentially, well, some people say it's the continuation of policy by other means, but I think it's the collapse. Well, anyway.
So you talked a moment ago about artificial intelligence always knows what the outcome will be, but applying that same idea about the external market forces. But in the case of AI, something as basic as ChatGPT is overwhelmed by users. Or there's an outage or whatever. So there's a disruption to the output. But is it a matter of that once it's, I call it, back online, the output that was intended before the disruption is still going to be the same output?
Well, if we believe in the name generative pre-trained transformer,
okay,
the thing was pre-trained.
Right.
So if you are giving it enough of a trained kind of question, you will, the expectation you will get the same result. So more or less the same result.
Yeah. So the disruption just is a delay, not a change.
Yeah, the disrupt. Sure. So it's now obviously based on your usage, based on who you are and if the thing knows you, based on the instructions you gave before of what it can do and not do. Because clearly my ChatGPT gives me different results than yours.
Yeah.
Because especially the paid versions, I mean. So the thing is, the more I've been working with Midjourney from the beginning, version 1 was still, in my view, the most poetic one because it didn't really know much. So the returned images were quite poetic from a sort of a mistake. They were making so many mistakes that they were funny and poetic at the same time. And what I discovered then was this notion of incidental beauty. When things are beautiful accidentally, like in nature, like not not because the system wanted to make them beautiful, but on the other hand, the system was pre-trained on beauty, right? Because most of the images, by default, I wouldn't put a bad image into a system. But as more and more people used it for more and more intelligent outputs, the system became very smart, because that's what pre-training is all about. So it's like any kid. The more it's exposed to great ideas, the more it can connect different bigger dots and bigger ideas.
Well,
so
sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
So to build on that, so in your book, Transcending Imagination, you describe AI as a collaborator, not a competitor. So building on what your early work with Midjourney as an example.
Yeah.
What mindsets or practices should entrepreneurs and creatives adopt to engage AI as a true partner or collaborator?
Talk to it as if you talk to a human being. Talk to it as like a real collaborator. I was working today earlier. I was asking for some images with ChatGPT. I was showing a student the limitations of ChatGPT versus Midjourney in creating something connected to the future of fashion. And it gave me something, ChatGPT, and I said, this is very lame. And that's exactly what I would have said to a human, because lame is a very different kind of word than it's bad or it's not powerful enough. Like lame has actually a definition. And then the pre-trained system can look at the word lame and understand exactly how to fix it, to address the lameness, right? Not to address. So that is a unique part. When you start dealing with it as something that can push you forward, can make progress, can understand instructions in a very semantic, like refinement of the word, that is amazing. You rarely find people that can react this way.
But
so then,
keep going.
So then, if you treat it like that, in that book, if you looked at it, I came up with a theory of generative AI, which was called creative generativity, which means when you give a prompt on which the system was not trained, or when you give it two images which have no connection to each other, and you ask it to blend them. And then you get to an aesthetic that is absolutely, completely unique, completely original, completely new. So I blended, for example, woodworking tools with the Apple Vision Pro, and I got some stunning shapes that I would have never been able to contemplate, to originate myself, shapes which my design background and design training allow me to declare they're really good, because I know what a good shape looks like, except that it doesn't have a purpose. So now I get to invent a purpose. What can this be? What is this object? So then you realize we're in a different level of creativity right now, because we are no longer going from object to object, design a chair, no, we are going from object to subject. And that is a deeper kind of level of education, design education, art education, understanding of reality as well. Object to subject. Don't forget, anytime we're asked to design objects, we are essentially given an outcome which is clear. Design a chair. That's the maximum I can do, is a chair. Design a spoon, design a fork. These are not problems anymore. They've been solved 5,000 years ago. So right now we are skimming it in a different shape or covering in a different fabric. Is that what human creativity can do? Is that the limit? And then we have magazines photographing it and people getting awards for chairs, and everybody's happy you have a new chair. And there's shows in Milan with millions of chairs. Anyway, I think we're better than that. And that's what AI is doing. It's forcing us. And that's another thing that's interesting about AI, connected to your question of collaboration. You never looked at AutoCAD as a collaborator. You always look at AutoCAD as a tool. I don't think you ever looked at Photoshop as a collaborator. You looked at it as a tool. Now I'm using design tools, but
yes.
Word will be the same way, or Excel is the same way, right? So you never looked at them as tools. They were collaborators. They didn't talk back.
Yeah, just tools.
They didn't have any opinion. So in other words, they came to us as an answer to a question we asked. The question is, how can I automate writing? word processing? How can I automate tabulations and calculations and ledgers and so on? And then Microsoft Excel shows up, or Lotus at the time, a long time ago, or word processing was the first rendition of that stuff. So then you realize that all of these technologies, including the objects around you, which are artificial, came as answers to questions. AI comes to you as a question. What can you become? What can you be now that you don't have to do all? Then you don't have to vacuum the floor.
You talked about AutoCAD, Excel, Photoshop doesn't have an opinion, but people have argued the same thing about AI, meaning that it's been trained on information. So it doesn't have an opinion. It has the ability, based on its training, to take a lot of data and distill it and make some recommendations and so on. But that's a learned response versus a independent opinion.
So we get back to the prompt. So if I'm asking the prompt, design me imagine a painting that looks like Bosch, it gives me a painting that looks like Bosch. Mm-hmm. Or imagine a dancer that looks like Degas. So I have something that resembles Degas because it has a trained thing with Degas, right? Or design a chair, same thing. If I say design a Bruegel, it doesn't know what to do. Which means instead of saying design a chair, I will say imagine a device that suspends the human body above ground in a relatively comfortable position. The only thing it has in that moment is the definition and possible image connected to each one of the words. So it will pick some of the words, right, and it will give me something, but the result overall as a shape will be completely new and unrecognizable as a chair. It will suspend the human body above ground.
But what we call it remains to be seen.
No, we can still call it a chair.
Okay.
Because we gave it the conceptual definition of what a chair is, not the image definition of what a chair is. So that's the difference between prompting and mimicking.
Right. But
and that's the difference actually between design and mimicking as well.
Mm-hmm. But and that leads me to, you made a comment to me. I asked you at your book launch, is AI a threat to designers? And you said to me that an industrial designer has the training to discern good design from bad.
Sure.
So that AI is trained on many of the same materials. But again, and I've used your answer in conversations about, can it do certain things? Yes. But this idea of having its own independent opinion or being able to discern quality, and it kind of ties back to your comment about lame.
Right. If you give it if you give it 4 or 5 incredible images disconnected in terms of objective purpose from one another, like, Apple Vision Pro and a wood plane tool, which have nothing in common, it gives you an object at the end, which is a blend that by the nature of the pre-training, it has an aesthetic of its own. In other words, you can use the word beauty connected to it. It's not something ugly. If I ask it to give me an unusable tool, which clearly it wasn't trained on, it will give me an unusable tool. Now, I trained my Midjourney on giving me absurd tools, which look like tools. In other words, if I'm asking, is this a tool or a toy? You'll say it's a tool because it has the metal and the wood and the handle part, but clearly non-usable. So then you understand, first of all, how whimsical you can get with this kind of stuff. Then you understand how you can go against the grain of the pre-trained shapes. And that's when you start getting to a new aesthetic that otherwise you would have never gotten to with traditional means. Because our mind cannot possibly blend these shapes. We can try, but I don't think we can do it.
Well, and to go back to your comment about lame, so is there an element of that Midjourney knows sufficiently, or ChatGPT knows sufficiently what lame means? Or what I've developed a habit of doing now is asking the whatever LLM I'm using, reflect on your previous output, critique it, rank it from 1 to 10, 10 being best, and make recommendations on where and how you would improve it.
Yes, yeah.
But which is better, giving it a succinct word like lame, but there's some subjectivity to that, or causing it to critique itself?
No, if you cause it to critique itself, you go to the rational side of how the system thinks. If you give it lame, it kind of puts it to shame. So it has to purely react into multiple dimensions.
So
like
do you err on the side of playing on emotionality and whimsy?
Yeah. When I created early with one of my startups I work with, we created a worker. I will be brutal with, and I had a TA at one point, which was AI. I was very brutal. I was telling it exactly what to do, what not to do. I was using a tone of voice, which was trained, like the thing understood tone of voice, because it should get tone of voice, because there is a social life of computing, which a project at MIT for many, many years that has been training computers to be social, to understand the social nuances, the voice, the timbre, the anger in a voice.
Right.
And that's where we are going. So of course I'm going to err on the side of being part of the training and saying, hey, you're funny. Now, if I ask, hey, Google, tell me a joke. Can you turn the volume? Hey, Google, turn the volume to 60%. Anyway, you get the idea, right? So why do zombies never laugh? Anyway, I didn't listen to the end of the joke. But,
right. A horse walks into a bar.
Yeah, exactly. So it knows. But on the other hand, if you ask it to give you a good night story, it does it. And this is something we call a speaker. We call this a smart speaker because we need this transitional nomenclature, like a speaker and smart speaker and personal assistant, digital assistant, right? And you don't want to just make it part of your life, but then you give it a name, social, Alexa. So,
but I mean, I guess, for the sake of those listening in or watching, is there a kind of an overarching approach to prompting that you recommend? Like, yes, speaking, being prepared to use a spectrum of tone, but is there anything, what else would you recommend?
Natural language.
So talking more than scripting.
Yeah. No, not talking. In other words, talk to it the way you talk to you and to anybody. Talk to it as if you talk to a human being. Be extremely detailed. Be extremely funny if you have to be funny, or very serious if you have to be very serious. Of course, you can start playing that role of give it a role. You are the world's best chess player and blah blah. Well, if by the end of the conversation it doesn't know it is the best chess player, then something is wrong. In other words, if you have to tell Andrew who Andrew is, so Andrew can become Andrew, that's a problem. So I treat it with much more human approach than I will than people advise in what I see. All the prompting things, the lessons giving on YouTube to the people over 40 who think ChatGPT is just for searching.
Well, and
all that kind of stuff.
That leads me to a question I wanted to pose to you as well. So the talk about AI now and a disruption to the work world, especially for 20-somethings just leaving school, or those that are using ChatGPT now as to write their essays and so on, versus the people later in life like yourself and myself who know a world pre-ChatGPT. We have our historical accumulated experience, etc., which some argue makes us a better user of AI because we treat it as a collaborator. Versus because using the same thing as AI has been trained on lots of source material. Well, if we treat ourselves as walking source material, we might be a better collaborator than someone who's younger and less experienced. But I'm curious to get your perspective on that.
Well, in my case, my language model, I gave it all my stuff, all my books, all my articles. So I really gave it my voice.
Right.
So in that moment, if you ask ChatGPT right now to write in my voice, it will do it. Because it has enough of my 12 books to understand how to write.
Right. But that's that walking source material that I was talking about.
Exactly. Right. So that means that the people that have a digital footprint by the virtue of age, exposure, practice, and so on, definitely have an advantage in collaborating, not in working with, in collaborating with generative AI. Because they're known. Their style is known, their voice is known. So the thing is likely to be a completion of or an extension of who they are. So in my case, my process is dictate. I dictate my thoughts. I clean it up in Grammarly like I would normally do. And then I may reformat or restructure if I need to, like an editor will do in ChatGPT. So I transcribe my classes this way. I write chapters in books this way. So it's from voice, text, grammarly, to give some correction, and then you move it to ChatGPT for a restructuring if need be, or you ask it, are these two paragraphs too similar? Which is what exactly an editor will do, or a ghostwriter would have done it anyway.
Right.
So then,
and then it's reflected against the source material that you've given it from past books and things like that.
Of course, it's a continuation. So it's an extension of my capability. Interestingly enough, Grammarly adds sometimes, because I don't, it's very complicated when you write or you dictate to add M dashes, because you have to have a double command. But Grammarly does it. Grammarly recommends M dashes where I normally put a normal dash, right? Because I put a normal dash because it's easy.
Right.
But to emphasize something I'm saying, I put a dash. Then I know Grammarly is going to correct it to an M dash. Then it goes to a ChatGPT. It leaves the M dash. Then it comes back, and if anybody checks it against AI, it tells you it's an AI text because there's M dashes. So people don't understand how this works. And anyway, it is what it is.
We'll be back in a moment. And now, a word from our sponsor. Social media has become an imperative for almost every business. Discover how to successfully implement an effective social media strategy that is supported and integrated throughout every part of your organization with this essential book from our host, Andrew Jenkins, Social Media Marketing for Business, Scaling an Integrated Social Media Strategy Across Your Organization, is now available from Amazon or KoganPage.com. Now, back to the show.
On this line of thinking about collaboration in a business context, is there, well, actually, sorry, we're going to skip that for a moment because we're talking about the walking source material and experience. I wanted to talk to you about the impact on education. And using the example of the 20-somethings less experienced, but they're using AI to, they're thanking ChatGPT to get them through graduation.
Right.
Or getting them to graduation. Do you see it as a disruptor? Is it just another evolution stage of education and how we teach and how we assess and how we learn?
Right. Well, it is foundational. In other words, it will force us at one point, if we are serious educators and not just administrators of knowledge, which most people are. In other words, if we are scholarly inclined and we are actually people that create knowledge and disseminate knowledge in what is called scholarship activity, then we will start questioning what knowledge is today. So what is the future of knowing in a society that now has this technology? And then we will start reevaluating the colonial method of assessment. And I'm sorry to use this kind of language, but this is where we are right now. Mm-hmm. Decolonializing without decolonializing, like we grade, mm-hmm. and we write essays. What can be more colonial than that? Right? And we are not even asking why we are writing essays. So, but we are complaining that people might use technology to write an essay. Well, if people can use technology to write an essay, then we do not need people to write essays. So then we have to question the value of essays in the demonstrated capability of understanding subject matter or phenomena. Mm-hmm. And I don't need an essay. I need a test. I need something that's physical. I need something that I was born in Romania. We were not writing essays. We were given tests, physical tests in front of the professor in class. Mm-hmm. There were 15 pieces of paper on the table, each one with a question. You pick one, you answer the question. Thank you very much. That's how you demonstrate knowledge, demonstrating knowledge. Well, you don't write a short form essay to say, hey, this is what I think about what this guy said. What is the value of that exactly? Then you start judging grammar, phrase structure, but where is the knowledge in that? So the whole thing is, most of essay writing is actually about form. It's actually about opinion and belief and image. Mm-hmm. But it's not about pure reasoning. Very few things are structured like that, like Platonic knowledge, pure reasoning and knowledge.
Well,
and very few professors even know Platonic academic systema.
But
okay,
keep going.
No, that's it.
Well, so
it's enough of a critique of the education
no,
system.
well, I mean, the reason I brought it up is because I feel that the educational system is fraught for disruption.
Yeah, because there's another issue here that's very important in the education system. Very few people involved in that system, I'm talking about university level, have studied pedagogy. You know, that's a reality. So if you go around and you ask people that teach a subject matter and you say, wow, amazing stuff, but have you ever studied how to teach? Like the thing that how you actually teach knowledge, how you not
I just went to school the longest and got a PhD, but I didn't learn.
Not a taxonomy of knowledge, not the superficial stuff that you need to know. No, Vygotsky, stuff. The most knowledgeable other, like what is the most knowledgeable other? How do I impart knowledge? How do I get to the zone of proximal knowledge? Like all of these things, you have to take people and take them to a place. That's not an essay. That's an experiential learning. That's a vision. That's a professor that invites thinking, not doing.
Do you foresee a world where we'll have an oral exam with AI and we're assessed on our answers?
Sure. The ideal situation, in my view, right now is AI becoming a tutor because it has all the answers. And there's no point in you having answers and there's no point in people asking you questions because the answers are completely there. And then the professor becomes somebody who inspires thinking. So my role is to transform my students into understanding that they are the project, not the physical thing they're building. That is the temporal part. That's the thing that will disappear and will lose value as time moves on because people will not relate to it. The only enduring project is themselves.
But
and that's where I act. I act at that level. And in my corporate work in the same way. My clients are the project, not their temporary business. They can create any business they want if they understand who they are.
But to make that bridge from education to business, if somebody used ChatGPT to write all their essays to get them to their graduation, then they move out into the real world. How do potential employers, is there a risk that the people that relied on AI to get through university, that they're going to hit a wall somewhere in the corporate world where they'll be found out for actually having not learned anything, that they deferred to AI to do the learning and the regurgitation for them? How do educators, how do employers?
See, you are outlining a future, again, completely abstract and non-existent.
Well, this is speculative.
It's a complete speculation, but it's based on a couple of faulty assumptions.
Okay.
So the first faulty assumption is that the essay form will continue. The second faulty assumption is that people will use ChatGPT to write the essay. The third assumption is that people will learn nothing while doing this thing.
I'm not saying nothing, but it's a fair point.
Okay, we'll learn not enough to be of value to an entity.
But it goes back to what I was saying earlier about
the final assumption is that the entity itself, the business hiring these people, needs them. That's the faultiest assumption.
Yeah, that's an even more important point.
So the more important point is, what is the meaning of life in that context?
And then, I didn't know we would be going there today, but
the meaning of life, if you ask most people, connected to artificial intelligence and the disappearance of jobs, it's always connected to income. It's not to work. It's not to relevance. In the end, bottom line is money. How do I continue to make a living? Not questioning other models, societal models, which were proposed, universal basic income or whatever, and without questioning models in which money did not exist, without questioning the largest model in which there is no transactional capability connected to fiat money, which is nature. And nature kind of works by itself. And nobody, and people may think, well, that's really abstract. No, this is really, really completely real, completely enduring. Okay, there is no transaction. In other words, the important thing to understand here, if you go to that's why it's foundational what's happening right now, and that's why everything is rolling off the field, because you realize that we are being forced to understand life in a different way, and that's what disruptors, profound disruption comes when the foundation is threatened by a transformational, civilizational kind of thing. Fire was one. The printing press was marginally one, not as big as fire. The internet might have been like the printing press, but generative AI, and only generative AI, because in other words, the thing that generates wealth, that generates image, generates text, generates outputs. That's what I mean. That will transform everything, and it will return us back to understanding that it doesn't take money to grow wheat. If you take money to wheat, it doesn't grow. It takes water. Whoa. All of a sudden, you start understanding, wait a second, same thing with life. Life is not about cash flow. Life is about having coffee, having bread, having things that don't cost money. We made them to cost money because of human greed, because we cannot learn what humans are. Contemplative animals. The only one that can actually contemplate, understanding why. And how do I prove that? I talk about it in the book. We have 52,000 museums. Do you know what their purpose is? To contemplate. We built 52,000 structures full of stuff from 2,000 years ago that does zero objective functionality, except that you go stay in line for 5 hours to look at the Mona Lisa, which doesn't say anything. And you look at her and you feel completely satisfied.
And also surprised at how small it is.
But you never, exactly. Or Vermeer or all the other painters, right, except for Picasso, which is always the size you expect, interestingly enough, and Monet, like they're gigantic. So then you realize that life is about that moment in which you lose yourself in Mona Lisa's smile. I should write a book about this.
Well,
so then you realize, but we never connect ourselves from that moment to ourselves in the moment we earn the money to allow us the other moment, right? But it's the same human being. So now remove the work that takes you to see the Mona Lisa and just look at the Mona Lisa. And you say, yeah, but what will people do? Well, we invented professions. You know why we invented professions? We invented machines. And then we invented people to fix the machines. And that's called a profession, a mechanic. And then we invented other people to teach the mechanics. And we call them mechanical engineering. And then we invented, so these are all inventions, exactly like the invention of money.
We just kept creating concentric circles around.
Exactly. And then we invent AI. So then AI goes kaboom. It's inside out, outside in disruption. Because inside out is a transistor that grows and grows and grows, right? Circuit boards. Outside is COVID or earthquakes or cyclones and so on. This is both. And now we are being threatened both ways because we don't understand it at a philosophical level of life. Because we think we have to incorporate it in our life. We have to adapt it to our life. No, we need to change our life for it. We did this many times, actually. It's nothing new. For the people that did not witness the 80s, in the 80s, we did not have computers.
Yeah.
The first, yeah.
Well, I mean, my business wouldn't exist without the internet, and like my guidance counselor in high school could never have predicted social media and so on.
Sure.
But
yeah. So we've been to these transformations. That's my point. We went through this questioning of what life is about. We went through this, in my situation, 7 times. In other words, it's what I call the end of the beginning. Like I witnessed the end of the beginning many, many times. We introduced the IBM personal computer in 1981. And all of a sudden, people looked at, so what does this do? I recently finished a book, popular science book, and I talk about 31 technologies that transformed us. And one of them is the personal computer. And I designed the personal computer in 1982. It was called the Pied Piper communicator. Anybody interested can go to PC Dinosaurs, PCDinosaur.com, and see the Pied Piper communicator made by Semitech Microelectronics. Anyway, 1 megabyte unit.
It was rocking.
Floppy disk drive. Rocking. So it had no screen. You had to attach it to an amber monitor. And so it was selling at the Mall of America in Menlo Park, California, Silicon Valley, 1983, March. So I tell the story of walking into the store and looking. It was a camera store. because that's where computers were sold on Queen Street in Toronto, in stores that sold sewing machines, cameras, VCRs, like all the stuff that had some electricity in it, right? So and IBM typewriters, right? So the computer is there, and I'm bringing some posters to do the marketing, and I'm looking at the salesperson. And I'm saying, "Do you think this has a market?" And the guy looks at me surprised, like, "Why would I even ask that question?" He says, "Absolutely not," but smiling. And then I look at the security guard behind him, and I said, "Do you think this has a market?" Because they see people coming in the store, and the guy looks at me and says, "Absolutely not." And they were very happy about it because they didn't understand one iota of what the thing was doing. And they were happy to inform me that nobody will, and nobody did, and nobody asked. And this is where we are now. From 1 megabyte to terabytes. And the absolutely not became an everyday thing.
So, I mean, so is it a matter of then allowing AI and LLMs, et cetera, to your point, we have to adapt to it, similar to when initially...
We have to reinvent ourselves for it, not adapt to it. That's what we did with PCs.
Right. That's where I'm going with that. Is this idea of...
We reinvented work. People don't think about it this way.
Yeah.
We reinvented work. We reinvented the office. We had open space concept office. We had noise canceling devices because we had noise, which we never had before. The noise coming from printers.
Mm-hmm.
Then we had scanners. Then we had, can you imagine, binding machines? Then we had punch, like, we invented all this stuff and adapted to it. And all of a sudden you went to school to be whatever.
Right.
Now you have to work with PowerPoint.
Yeah. It's all about, we got to do the deck. Got to do the deck.
Yeah.
But
got to do the deck.
That reinvention, this kind of ties it all together, where we were talking about the disruption happening in education and like, oh, ChatGPT helped me graduate. And then they hit a wall in the work environment.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's reinvention as the overarching thing that's happening, education gets reinvented. Therefore, the
business gets reinvented. Yeah.
So
remember the open letter that the CEO of Shopify sent a couple of months ago, asking people to justify why they are not using AI.
Yeah.
There's no reason. I mean, in other words, give me one logical reason why not to use it. How can I possibly tell my students don't use it when I know their competitors will?
Well, so the analogy I used to use is that if you ask 10 people in an office, what's your favorite feature of Microsoft Word? You're going to get a different answer because not all 10 have used every feature about the Microsoft Word. Yeah. If we apply that to, as you said, so that the executive from Shopify says, justify why you're not using AI. Is that to assess who's using it, and two, how they're using it, and they're going to get
how creative. Yeah. How do we improve my business using this new collaboration? Essentially, everybody got a new employee.
Right.
Everybody got a new collaborator, and they are not taking advantage of it.
Right.
And that collaborator might know more than you. So remember something in our life, like in the last 20 years, we witnessed the introduction of social media and the behavior platforms, YouTube, Facebook, and so on. That was inconceivable at the time. It had no purpose. It didn't solve any problem. In other words, it didn't go to the framework that we were used to, problem, solution. No, it was a question. What can I do on Facebook? It was completely human. It was a stage for the new human experience. And people were joining without even understanding why they were joining. Because we all have to read a book called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, Edwin Goffman, 1954, and we understand why we join Facebook or why we take selfies. But a few of us read these books and know it. Other people don't. So then the whole thing becomes translation. My role in design for many years at that time was to translate what was going on into an example of something that makes sense to you. So we wrote stories, scenarios. So we always lived in this kind of transformation, right? Some of not as drastic as this one, but you and I met before social media existed, 2004, 2005, right?
Yeah, I think so. Well, right. Somewhere there.
At a bill, yeah. So then all of a sudden, in 2007 and 8, companies need to have a social media presence without understanding why. And then our friend Rahav Harfouch becomes a guru at 24 because she knows how to use social media. Now, then Obama gets elected with the Obama app.
Yep.
Because they have the 25-year-olds creating this social media presence, which McCain did not understand.
Yeah, that was.
So that was
huge factor.
And then will.i.am starts singing "Yes, We Can," and then so all of these things were distributed in social media, a thing that previous to that election did not exist. So how can I say? How can I not understand that that was transformative to the point of today? The behavior economy dominates the material goods economy by enormous factors, right? Minus Tesla. Like that was, they still make physical things, but
I was just having this conversation this morning about a potential client that they don't understand where and how social can play a role in their business. Same thing with, but they're putting themselves in the shoes of their client or their customer. And I've often had to say, it's not about how you behave with social or just more broadly. It's not how.
It's about how everybody.
Yeah, it's about how the behavior of those that you're trying to reach, and you have to meet them where they're at. Yeah. But
although I have to say, on the client side, I was telling my clients and students that in the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years maybe, the clients came fully briefed. In other words, it was less of a push and more of a pull. In other words, they understood why they needed this whole exposure to new thinking, to new frameworks of, because this is this is the foundational stuff that will be way different than digital transformation, like the 2010, 2012 times. This will be way more big, way more transformational, if I can use that expression, way bigger. So there.
So final words, if you were an entrepreneur, a leader in digital marketing, faced with these evolutional forces, what would you say? What to be mindful of, or what recommendations would you give?
I will look at what is the biggest disruption that is awaiting us. So disruptors create disruptions. So the disruptor is usually a technology, the disruption is a behavior. So the behavior is that if you have autonomous things at work, then people have less of a role to play. When people have less of a role to play, they might lose that job. But on the other hand, that job becomes performed by a machine, which is 1,000 times more productive, or 100 times, or a factor of X more productive. And that more or increasing productivity means you either get a cheaper product outcome, or you get more, or you get it. And then in that moment, you get more income in society, which becomes robot tax, for example. To go to Korea has robot tax. And then you start taxing the surplus of these organizations to create a wealth of, if you are still using money, create a wealth of money. For as long as we have money, this is the only option. Distribute this wealth to other people, which are doing essentially no work. But the question becomes, what are they doing? Well, they go back to what life is about, contemplation. So we have courses in mindfulness right now. My son was proposing, he teaches in a school, he's trying to teach courses of contemplative studies. And the problem we have is that we have not learned how to contemplate as an organized humanity on this side of the ocean. Some other countries have maybe traditions, but we don't. And then we think that life is about work, but that's not what life is about. Life is about creating these moments in which we contemplate we exist. Poetry, music, painting, sculpture, and so forth, which remain as a testament that we existed. And then we go to museums for thousands of years to see them. And that's the story of life. That's not some invention of this moment. And as soon as we recognize that, and we can recognize it only if we study, contemplative study, then we understand that this is, Aristotle, Greek philosopher guy, said that the purpose of action is contemplation. And you may think, wow, this is a contradictory statement. No. The purpose we do things is to arrive at a moment of not doing things so we can contemplate who we are. Which very few people know, and very few people have the courage to do.
Do you mean to suggest that AI might give us the freedom for contemplation?
Yes, absolutely. Freedom we are not ready for. That's the point. Some of us are not ready for. So then,
would we even know it if to see it when it?
Depends what you smoke.
Okay.
Well, I don't smoke, but you get the. We can imagine it, right? So,
well, we'll leave it there.
We'll leave it there.
But
I think the answer was very clear.
Yeah, contemplation. No, I love it.
Yeah,
but it's a great. I think that's a great place to leave it.
I hope your audience likes it as well. And you don't get any too many haters on this subject.
I think they'll love it.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Low Production High Value Show. Be sure to give us a rating and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out Volterra at volterradigital.com to learn more about how they can support your social media marketing.